Agnostic, Kickstart's weekly podcast where we bring together experts from across the tech market to discuss best practices on how to scale your startup. I'm Finbar Dalton, and today I'm joined by Stephen Pendrell, current fractional CRO at Qudo, a leading SaaS startup in the MarTech space. So to get things started, Stephen, could you just provide an introduction into yourself, your current role, and sort of how you've got to where you are today?
Yes, I can, and thank you for having me on. It's good to be here. So, my previous experience goes back a good 23 years now. My leadership journey started back in 2007, just before the financial crisis. So times have definitely changed a lot since then. My journey actually first started, my sales journey first started back in media sales. I spent 5 years with eBay, moved into leadership, and really was there sort of at the beginning of the SaaS boom, and have worked in leadership positions in the vendor sort of SaaS space across data, MarTech, AdTech since then, and I'm currently working, as you say, as Chief Revenue Officer for Qudo, which is a very exciting early stage research tech startup.
Sure. No, that makes sense. And I guess obviously Qudo is quite an early stage startup. And you were obviously brought in as sort of the first sort of sales leader within that organization to transition the business away from sort of founder-led sales. When do you think startups should really consider sort of moving away from founder-led sales and sort of maybe bringing somebody like yourself on board?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question, and I don't think that there is one straightforward answer because it's very subjective, and I think it depends on company to company and founder to founder. I think what I would say is that it's critical for founders to be in a position where they know what they're selling and who they are selling to before they can even start to think about bringing in a full-time salesperson. Having developed that rhythm and understanding of what messaging works with a customer, what doesn't, and essentially doing all of those things that are illustrating that you are some way close to achieving product market fit, that is going to be critical, because when that salesperson does come in, they are going to be leaning on you extremely heavily for wisdom and advice on how they upskill themselves. What you don't want to be doing is hiring a salesperson too early before product market fit has been achieved, because then they're going to just be floundering and they won't last long. So, you talk about product market fit, and it takes a while for any business to achieve product market fit. And it's not as though, you get up out of bed one morning and you suddenly realize, oh, we've achieved it. It is an iterative process. But I think, if you're retaining as a founder, if people are buying your product and you're retaining those customers, and at least a small portion of those customers are then referring you on, then you have sufficient product market fit to say, right, actually, let's pull the trigger on this. But then you get to the subject of, okay, so who do we bring on? If you bring on somebody too senior, and you bring on an out-and-out salesperson, the commission isn't necessarily going to be there. It's probably not fully scalable yet. Therefore, they probably won't last long. It's really vital to bring on somebody, I would say, who's more multi-skilled, a bit of a jack of all trades, somebody who can be an SDR, someone who can be an account manager, someone who can, work with product as well, because it's also incredibly vital to make sure that you're creating that product sales feedback loop, because the product's going to be iterating, the messaging is going to be iterating. So somebody who can wear those multiple hats and spin those multiple plates, that's the kind of person you want when you're transitioning away to from founder-led sales. And I think the only other thing I would say as well is, if budgets will allow, hire 2 people, because that will give you the opportunity to do a bit of an A/B test. And obviously, if both reps are succeeding, then fantastic, great, away you go. If both are failing, then you've probably hired too early. And obviously, if one is succeeding, one is failing, then that gives you the opportunity to be able to either, coach up or coach out.
Sure. No, I think that's a really interesting point. So obviously, just to strip that back a little bit, you obviously mentioned in terms of timing, things to be looking at are sort of revenue, retention, and referrals. Do you think there's any sort of indicators in terms of sort of numbers on that front that maybe it's a good time in a B2B SaaS organization? Is there a specific revenue number you think you should be looking for before you sort of pull the trigger on bringing somebody on board, or what would you say to that?
I wouldn't hold myself to a specific revenue number because it completely depends on, the multiple metrics within different SaaS businesses. If you're more of a lower volume, higher volume, more transactional, but lower value SaaS business, then, if you might well be getting up to that run rate that you need a lot earlier than the sort of the hallowed 1 million ARR. If conversely, if you're a SaaS business with much longer sales cycles, higher ACVs, then you might need to get to a higher volume of revenue to just make sure that you've got enough cadence in terms of, is this actually working? Is this repeatable? So it does depend, but I would say, certainly hovering between that sort of 1 to 2 million ARR is where you should definitely be thinking, okay, as a founder, it is no longer tenable for me to be sitting in the sales seat because I'm dropping balls in other areas. So, in the current engagement I'm in, we're at that sort of just sort of shy of sort of, between sort of 1 to 1.5 mil ARR. That's a good time to start thinking about, okay, scaling up, bringing in your first head of sales, but making sure that, they are multi-skilled and they're not, as I say, just doing out and out sales, because they're going to need to offer value in other areas of the business as well.
Sure. No, that makes a lot of sense. And obviously, I mean, we've seen an increasing demand for fractional talent in today's market. What do you think are the benefits of maybe bringing on board somebody on a fractional basis versus more of a permanent basis when looking to hire your sort of first head of sales or sales leader?
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, it's, as a founder, you're sort of hedging your bets slightly. So you're benefiting from the experience. I mean, you can't be an effective fractional without bringing with you, the experience and having the confidence to be able to give founders advice and speak to them, quite objectively. And I think one of the main benefits of coming in as a fractional, in the same way as, employing contractors or consultants in an early stage business, you're able to sometimes see the wood for the trees. You're able to speak in a way that sometimes a full-time employee might feel slightly less confident to be able to talk as honestly and as candidly. And you can bring that breadth of experience as well. For me, I'm just somebody who has always thrived on the variety and the chaos of working at a startup. And I've never been, you'd never find me as a head of sales or as a VP sales for a publicly listed company of 20,000 people, because it's too, to me, it's a bit too one-dimensional. It's a bit too safe and a bit too predictable. So, I like the chaos of it, and it's nice to be able to have that candid relationship with the founders where you can actually just say, listen, I think we potentially need to go in a different direction here. And the advice is taken on board in an advisory capacity rather than somebody who's just throwing their toys out of the pram.
Sure. No, that makes sense. I think the interesting point is obviously a lot of founders come from more, technical or product-driven backgrounds, oftentimes, and often they might not have that sort of commercial understanding of their business that they need to maybe take it from, the 1 million point and above. Because I mean, from my experience working with startups, oftentimes that initial revenue comes from, referrals and, maybe, people sharing their product with their friends who might do a role that requires that product, for example. So
Yeah, and I can
building.
give you an example of how actually it really pays to come at things from an objective angle, because it's very, very easy for founders to get emotionally involved in their product. Their product is their baby, and I've worked in scenarios where there's been so much emotional attachment that it's started to become a dogma within the business that, no, hold on a minute, they're not quite understanding what it is that we do. And you get to a point where you start sort of burning through clients, and nobody within the business is able to sort of knock on the founder's door to say, it's because we haven't found it yet. It's because what we're saying and what we're selling isn't actually the thing. And you'll be amazed how difficult that can be to actually say to a founder, if you are working within the business. And, you don't usually get politics at that early stage within the business, but there can be things preventing you from just speaking truthfully. So bringing in that experienced founder, whether it's a fractional, whether it's just a consultant who can actually speak in an advisory role, that can really kind of make the difference.
Sure. No, interesting. So obviously we've sort of identified when the best time to bring on, a first sales leader is. I guess the next step is obviously the sort of jobs to be done in that respect. What do you think a new sales leader coming into sort of a startup needs to achieve, and to make an impact in their first 90 days, really?
Yeah, and there's a couple of answers to this one as well, awkwardly. I think if you are a sales leader coming into a business, which is an early stage startup, you need to be fully prepared that the success metrics that you're going to be coming into as one of the first people on the ground are going to be vastly different to coming into a business where you're actually coming in as a sales leader and you're taking on a team or hiring a team. If you're coming in as a sales leader in an early stage business, it is vital for you to absorb and spend as much time with the founders as possible to learn through osmosis. And nothing can replicate the passion that a founder has selling their baby. So what you need to be able to do to make that transition as smooth as possible is inject the rigor in the process and the structure that you bring, but also to be able to translate that passion and convey that over to the customer as well. And I think that's really, really vital. So I'd say, just learning through osmosis, and, in all 90-day periods and all new jobs, the single most important thing is, using your ears more than you use your mouth. Now, if you're coming on board as a sales leader and you've got a job to do in terms of either inheriting a team or building a team, and let's just say you're coming in and you've got a small team, then no matter what anyone says, you can come to the role with a 30, 60, 90-day plan. The famous Mike Tyson quote, everyone has a plan until they get punched in the face. You can have that plan and you can get that quick win if you want to get that quick win. But actually, the single most important thing is get your team to understand you. You need to understand your team. Understand all of the pain and the day-to-day struggles that they are going through, and really sort of lead with empathy, because the single biggest thing you're going to be judged on in your first 90 days is your ability to be able to effectively lead and motivate and inspire your team. And the internet is absolutely rife with, this is the best 30, 60, 90-day plan. No one's going to be judging you on anything other than, is this a good fit for the team that we have? And can this person inspire, motivate, and lead? And you need to resist the urge, especially if you're going into leadership, an earlier part of your career. You've got to resist the urge to try to impress or to try and get a quick win. And that's a bit of a sort of an ego play there, where you sort of think, well, I've got to make an impact. No, your impact is your team needs to like you. your team need to think, actually, this is somebody I can learn from. But the only way you can do that is by listening, by getting in the trenches. Be the AE, be the SDR, be the CS person for a few days, and in that way you'll also earn trust as well. So that's what I would say in your first 90 days for sure.
No, I think that's really interesting. It's like obviously doing what you expect others to do is really important as a leader. If they can't see you doing it, then how do they know if it's perhaps even possible, especially if it's an early stage startup, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Interestingly, on the sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just thinking. I was thinking back to an experience I had a few years ago, actually, where I was working during the pandemic, and it was the first few months in a new role, and there were logistical reasons as to why you couldn't get into the office and physically sit down, but it made sit down with the team, but it made the learning process and the learning curve I had to get through a lot longer and a lot harder. And it made me realize at the time how much harder it was to become an effective leader to that team, because I was trying to understand what they were going through from an operational day-to-day perspective. But I'd set myself a completely unrealistic goal to be able to do it. And what I thought I was going to be able to achieve in 2 or 3 months actually took me over a year. And in turn, it took me a much longer period of time to develop the relationship that I aspired to having with my team. It's that relationship which is going to see you through those tough times, that is going to hopefully move the needle when it comes to just getting the right mindset and an attitude shift, and we're all in this together approach when times do get tough.
Sure. No, that makes a lot of sense. I guess I think that comes on to sort of the next point. I mean, one thing obviously is it's quite hard to motivate people who aren't sort of inherently driven or energetic or sort of passionate about sort of self-improvement and doing well within their roles, which is obviously sort of why hiring is so important and why sort of bringing on the right talent is so important. I guess as a sales leader, when you are looking to sort of build out your team, are there any sort of non-negotiable qualities that you'd be looking for to sort of decide whether to bring someone on? Really?
Yeah, there are. A long time ago, when I first started out at eBay, actually, a sales trainer told me about something called the skill will matrix. And out of all of the sales training I've had in all my career, I pretty much discarded about 98% of it. But this one little skill will matrix, probably because of its sheer simplicity, has always stayed with me, which is essentially, the importance of hiring for attitude over aptitude. And the skill will matrix is essentially, on the x-axis, you've got the skill, which is the proxy for, the deals, the closed won opportunities. And in the will on the y-axis is the effort that has been put in, whether or not that's, meetings attended or emails sent or proposals sent, and etc. And the X must be commensurate with the Y, and if it's not commensurate, then the amount of effort that goes in must be greater than the reward that has gone in. Because the one thing you can do is you can teach and you can coach skills, and as a sales leader who very much considers myself much more of a coach than a like a CRM manager, I very much enjoy coaching and developing my team in terms of sales process and getting on the call with them and helping them with specific kind of live training, because at the end of the day I love talking to customers, I love interacting with customers, and it's something I enjoy doing. But if you're doing that with somebody who just isn't really coachable and who already thinks, actually, I'm pretty great, but actually what the numbers say is, oh, in Q1 they smashed it, in Q2 not so much, Q3 smashed it, Q4 not so much. You can't rely on these people for consistency, and worst of all, they're going to be hard to coach. So the number one thing when it comes to hiring a sales team is, especially in a tough economy where you're going to have to do more for less, is to hire for attitude over skill.
Sure. I think that's really interesting. I mean, we use the skill will sort of process within our sort of recruitment process as well, to sort of understand sort of aptitude versus attitude. Do you think there's any good ways to sort of screen out candidates, maybe based on sort of the more attitude aspect of the role when it comes to how do you actually screen out whether somebody's inherently a hard worker, for example? It can be quite hard when just interviewing a candidate. Especially sales candidates who tend to be good at interviewing. Have you got any in that respect in terms of how to assess for that actual attitude piece?
Well, you've got to get them to show you how they've done something rather than just to get them to tell you a story. And that story may well be 100% what happened, but it's a lot more beneficial if you can actually get a feel for how they go about their day. So one of the key questions I would ask would be, a question around how they've overcome. So if this is an account management position, or if it's more of it's not an out and out new business role, but it's something that requires, relationship building and account management skills. It's about, show me an example of how you've overcome a tricky situation with a client and how you turn that round to positive effect. Examples are everything, of course. And for new business, again, it's around trying to get a flavor for how they go about their day, because new business is not, to be successful in new business, you don't have to be the greatest salesperson in the room. What you have to be is the most disciplined and the most consistent in your habits. And therefore, I will want to understand how they go about their working day, how they go about their working week. Is there a level of accountability and ownership that they are showing, and almost a level of sort of personal pride and discipline about how they go about their time to be the most effective at what they do. So you want to look for things like personal organizations and personal organization and time management, and looking for that consistency of habits. And that's what I look for in an interview. So it's a general range of ways of investigating how that comes to the surface.
No, that makes sense. I saw something interesting recently, which was a report which had analyzed like 1,500 BDRs to see like what the commonalities are of the ones that get promoted to A positions internally. And one of the interesting things was, obviously, people always try and correlate sports with sales performance. They tend to think people who are good at sports tend to be good at sales. But funnily enough, this report showed that actually people who do sports doesn't make much of a difference, but people who do individual sports tend to be much better salespeople than people that do team sports, which might come back to that sort of organization piece you mentioned, because obviously if you're a tennis player or a golfer, you have to be sort of inherently organized in your sort of day-to-day activities, whereas obviously if you work in a team sport, perhaps you can play off your other teammates a bit more. Maybe you don't have to be so disciplined on an everyday basis to be successful in that, which I thought was quite interesting.
I think the team aspect versus the individual aspect is really an interesting one, because I don't know any, if you're an overachiever in sales, it's not going to be solely because you're a good team player. It needs to be because you're a good individual performer. Not at the expense of your team, but I think that there is definitely a balance there. And, one of the things that, I get really inspired by are salespeople who are not necessarily having a particularly good run of it. And, in 2024, times are tougher. and we can go. I'm sure we'll go on and talk about that. But it's those that continue doing what they're doing, and your job as a sales leader is to keep on reinforcing that they're doing all the right things. They just need to keep plugging away and realizing that this is a time that will pass, and the fruits of their labor will be rewarded. So yeah, that goes back to the point about hiring for attitude over aptitude, because in more difficult situations you do need that resilience, which can be pretty hard to keep your head up when you're doing all of the right things, but your message is somehow getting lost in the ether of millions of other messages out there. So there's no magic cure to it all, but I think making sure that you have the people with the right attitude is really, really key for navigating these times.
Sure. No, that makes a lot of sense. I guess on that resilience piece you mentioned, obviously, if I'm a BDR or an account executive and I'm making, 50 calls a day, and I'm not getting certain meetings on the board for perhaps a few weeks, and my confidence might have been taken a bit of a hit in that respect, as I'm sure every salesperson has experienced at some point in their career. Obviously as a sales leader, I mean, what would your advice be to sort of keep people motivated during those periods where they might not be getting sort of the results they've been sort of hoping for, really?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard. It's really hard. I feel like you just simply need to have gone through at least one of these rodeos to realize that this is simply a moment in time. And I think, whether you want to call what we're in as a recession, or it's just, tougher out there, whatever you label on it, sales has just become so much harder than it was even sort of pre-pandemic 5 years ago. And it's so much harder to cut through the noise. And it can be really, really difficult to actually just keep your team motivated. But one of the things that I'm a huge advocate of doing is investing in my team so that I can understand what those intrinsic drivers are, aside from the money, right? Because every salesperson will be commercially motivated to do what they do. Okay. It would be disingenuous to say otherwise, but a lot of leaders, I feel, completely underestimate how much praise and encouragement, and personal, one-to-one coaching, where you're actually sitting down with your team and you're actually being present with them and you're listening to them, and how much of a difference that can actually make. I know it sounds really cheesy, but when I'm at home with my kids, I make a point of always saying to the kids every single week, how much I love them. They're terrific, and I'm lucky to have them. Now, I'm not going to say that to my teammates each and every day in the same way that I would say it to my kids, but I do use a sort of a professional version of that, which makes them realize that, providing the effort is going in and we're all doing the things that need to be done, then you can only control what you can control. And another thing that I remember from, actually, funnily enough, the same sales trainer back in those days was the CIA: control, influence, and acceptance. Right? There are things in life that you have full control over. So in the world of sales, you are fully in control of, how you turn up, the amount of effort that you put in. You have influence by virtue of the fact that you have so much control over the first bit. You have influence over how much you can move the needle in terms of, how many meetings perhaps you can get set up, or how many proposals you can get sent through. But you just have to accept that people's decisions will be their decisions. You have no control whatsoever if budgets get pulled. You have no control whatsoever in terms of if structures in the businesses that you're selling to have suddenly moved or changed priorities. So I just think, reverting things back to let's control the things that we can control, and reward based on the things and the efforts that you can control, rather than just make it all about the revenue.
So we obviously discussed it's really important to keep your team motivated, even in sort of challenging conditions or a downturn. What do you think are the best sort of methods to keep your team motivated during tough times? Really.
Yeah, that probably goes into two parts. I think selling better is one aspect of it, and also being an inspiration and a motivator to your team also is a secondary component. And the two aspects completely overlap with each other, of course. But I think in terms of just navigating the current landscape, as I said earlier, sales is tough now, and one of the main reasons why it's tough is because the buyer landscape is like insanely convoluted now. I read this recent Gartner report actually, which was on the piece that I wrote on LinkedIn, which is around there's between 6 and 10 buying just like steering committees for the average company in SaaS at the moment, and it's an insane buyer landscape to be able to navigate. So the need to actually multi-thread across different stakeholder groups and understand what drives them, their fears and hopes and objectives. It's really, really convoluted. So I think equipping your team to understand, not flipping the conversation from like sales to buyer enablement, and actually saying that this is what the buyer landscape looks like in our world. How can we best navigate it together? And so expectations on that one are really aligned. I think
Sure.
yeah, and I think the other one is you've just got to keep everyone's chins up in more difficult times. And I remember I had a really great leader during the first the first time it was really tough for me in 2008, and I just knew that they had my back, and it goes back to my last point around having people that have all got the right kind of attitude, knowing that it's not just all about the revenue at the end of the day, which I know sounds criminal to talk about when you're in a sales environment, but the reality is targets are not all going to be hit, but making sure that we're going on regardless, and the right behaviors are actually being incentivized. One thing I'm really big on at the moment is talking about the need to be more creative in sales. And creativity isn't actually something that you think of when you talk about sales teams and sales process, but there's a huge lack of creativity out there, in the sense of everyone's doing the same thing. Everyone is using sales automation tools, predictable prospecting, which whatever your opinions are on it, has definitely had its day. And if you don't believe that it's dead already, then it's definitely dying a death, because inboxes are ruined at the moment. So encouraging your team to be a bit more creative in how they sell, embrace one-to-one communications, embrace video, pick up the phone, because my emails are my email inboxes are absolutely ruined, but I scarcely get a call from somebody to actually talk about me. And that's the other point, is that salespeople often, there are so many people out there talking about their company, and it's so boring. Getting an email on LinkedIn or an email from a prospect, and all they're doing is just talking about how they can increase my revenue by X, or how they can get me X more meetings. It's all the same. It all sounds the same. These are clearly emails where no actual research has been done into the company, other than, are you the right job title? And do you loosely fit into this huge, ICP bucket? So I think now is the time to just stop and pause and actually realize that one-to-one connections are what you need in order to get you there. And yes, we had that point in sales where it was all about anchoring the ship and throwing the trawler net out there and seeing how much we could get. and throwing enough at the wall and see how much that could stick. I don't think you can do that anymore. And I think you're at risk of burning potentially great prospects if you do that. So I think it's about being a lot more considered, doing your research, and connecting people on an individual level, and talking about their problems rather than immediately launching into what makes you so great. So that whole thing about when everyone else zigs, you zag. That's something I'm a big believer in.
Sure, that makes a lot of sense. I'm hearing a lot about sort of the death of the predictable revenue model at the moment. I think a lot of people have sort of fed up, or maybe they're not getting the same results as they used to, which is interesting because I think there's two tenets of the predictable revenue model. One is just like the organization and volume of it, and then the second bit is obviously like the type of outreach that you do, which I think sort of the volume is always going to be pretty important, just because it is you do need to reach out to quite a few people to get an understanding of your market and their pain points. But obviously maybe it's the approach in terms of just sort of the generic emails that you get every day, which just aren't tending to be that effective.
Yeah, you're
have
right.
there
It's
been
the
any
channels.
Yeah,
No,
I think that's the
it's the channels, isn't it? It's the channels that you use. The volume needs to be there, but email is not the only channel. LinkedIn is not the only channel. Video messaging has come a long way. I used to get quite a few video messages about sort of 18 months ago. It was actually during the pandemic. Everyone was like using Loom or Vidyard or whatever these tools were, and I was getting quite a few of them, and I was genuinely engaged. I didn't buy anything, but I was genuinely a lot more engaged with listening to somebody, draw my name on a piece of paper and hold it up to the screen and say, "Hey, Steve, this is what we do," rather than an email. So maybe we need to revisit, all of the different slightly more creative channels that we can actually use. And it's just about diversifying them. I'm not saying it's easy, but we have to stop just generically sending thousands of emails out, because the response rates are just getting lower and lower and lower, and we're burning through people.
Yeah, no, it makes sense. I think it's interesting that with the video, I think it's a lot easier to hide behind emails and say, I've sent out 100 emails this week, where with the videos, it's quite hard to sort of get discipline around that in terms of, because it takes so much more effort to create sort of obviously personalized videos. And, if you're maybe not having the best day, it can be quite easy just to be like, oh, I'm going to not do videos
100%.
today.
And when I was at Gumtree, at eBay, we had, it sounds so old school now, but we had designated times where everyone was in the office and everybody was on the phone, and it was a great atmosphere. There was an amazing kind of camaraderie in the office, and it was a simple case that that the office was buzzing, everyone was talking, there was a real energy. And it's because the working world has changed now, and we're all working either purely from home or hybrid at best. And so it's really important, I think, that if you are leading a sales team, to at least have that one day a week where you can all get together, and just build that energy up together physically. And you can't replicate it virtually, and there is software out there which enables you to all have those times where you are all collectively on the phone talking or prospecting to clients, but it's no real replacement for doing things physically. And I think it's a lot harder in 2024 because we are all so disparate and working in so many different places.
Sure, no, that makes sense. I'm a big fan of being in the office, to be fair. I think sales, especially when it comes to prospecting, sales, it is good to have that energy around you, and oftentimes you do learn those little bits of wisdom through osmosis. I find maybe those useful bits of in terms of helping you get further into the conversation and things like that. So listen, Stephen, I think we've covered a lot today, a lot of interesting points, from everything from transitioning away from founder-led sales, hiring salespeople, and also sort of how to, keep teams motivated during sort of challenging times. So yeah, thanks very much for coming on. I guess if anybody wanted to get in touch with you in relation to any of the points we've discussed today, can they reach out to you on LinkedIn, or what would be the best way to sort of get in touch to have a conversation?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Feel free to reach out to me, Stephen Pendrell, on LinkedIn, or you can email me at stephen@sjpconsulting.co.uk, and that's Stephen with a PH, and we can have a chat.